And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's topic, and welcome to Mental Health Month, by the way. This is our first topic for Mental Health Month, but it is also Mental Health Month today. So welcome to Mental Health Month. The topic today, as we explained to you in our communications, is around stress, anxiety, burnout, and compassion fatigue. This is what most people have requested from us to talk about. And I think it's very, very relevant to what is going on in the world today. We see all around the world, a lot of people experiencing stress for different reasons. Maybe because they have to work from home, maybe because they're not working in an office, maybe because the kids are around, or maybe because they have to teach the kids part of the school curriculum, a myriad of things that can be causing stress at the moment. Some people may be worried about the fact that what if they have to work from home, are they producing enough work, and is their work justified to their boss? A myriad of things. So this is actually quite relevant at the moment. I'm very excited to be talking to you about these topics, and so is Amy Golding. Say hi, Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Psychology here at the Workplace Mental Health Institute. Very excited to be doing our first live today for Mental Health Month, which is October in Australia. I realize it's May in other parts of the world, but in Australia, where our head office is, it's October.
And like with anything that is the first time, well, we are new to the technology. So if we don't get everything exactly right, just please forgive us. Be a little bit patient with us. But here we go. All right, so what we're going to go talk about, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions, make comments. From time to time, we will be stopping and looking at what questions have been asked. And yeah, that's pretty much how it's going to work. We'll work it out together. And now I'll pass it over to you, Emmy.
Okay, great. So we wanted to start by talking about stress. So this is such a common term. It's being used more and more these days. But what are we actually talking about when we say stress? Because it's not actually a diagnosable mental health issue. So it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, but like anxiety or depression are. But it is often associated with mental health. And there are evaluation measures that measure your level of stress, for example, and self-reported measures. So there are a few different ways that we can think about stress. And I think one of the most simplest ways to consider it is if you imagine that sort of mental health continuum with really positive, good, strong well-being up one end, someone who's excited to wake up in the morning, they fill their day with things that are meaningful and purposeful. And, you know, at the very extreme end, you could even say someone who's enlightened. And then you've got sort of just wellness and well-being, and yeah, things are going well. Further down that continuum, you have what some people might call normal. We don't know what normal is. There's a saying in the mental health industry that that's a setting on your washing machine. That's pretty much it. What is normal anyway? But if you move a little bit lower down that continuum, you might start to get stress. So we've got really good well-being, medium well, normal, and then we've got starting to see some signs of stress, you know, some of the cracks starting to show. If you go a little bit further, you get distress. And at some point there's a line, and the professionals will disagree as to where that line is. At some point it can get diagnosed as a mental health disorder. And because it's so subjective, there's no blood test, there's no x-ray, there's no sort of physical measure that you can do. It's very much based on your self-report of feelings. So that's very subjective. And that's why different professionals will sort of disagree as to whether someone has crossed that line or not. But somewhere there's a line. And then you've got more and more severe degrees of mental disorder. So I think that's the easiest way to think about it, is this continuum, and stress is when we just start to shift down towards that not so positive mental health end. But it still doesn't really say what is stress, what is that sort of nature of it. So I like to think about this by comparing it to physical stress. And if you imagine, for example, a bridge might get stressed when pressure's put on it, or if there's too much weight, or a muscle gets stressed if there's too much strain put on that. And yet the purpose of a bridge is to carry weight as people cross over it. And the purpose of a muscle is to be exercised, to work. So it's all about degrees here when we're talking about stress. Peter, I know you draw a distinction between stress and pressure. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the problem with terms. Sometimes people start using them and they use them indistinguishably. So the question here is, are you experiencing stress, which is a fear response, or pressure? Pressure is fine, that's part of life. So I'll give you an example. If you go into the gym and you're lifting a weight, right? Or you can imagine, maybe you've never done that, but you can imagine going into the gym and the trainer, your coach, is telling you, okay, now you're gonna lift this weight over your head. And all of a sudden your muscles will start hurting because that's what they're supposed to do. At some point, they need to experience the pressure enough so they start hurting a little bit. But if you're new to this pain, if you start freaking out in your head, oh my God, I'm going to hurt myself, this is not supposed to hurt, then that gets turned into stress. So what happens is pressure, the information of pressure comes to you, and in your brain, you yourself are deciding what you're going to be doing with that pressure. If you think that pressure, oh, this is good, this pain that I'm feeling is exactly what I need to feel to be fit, healthy, and my muscles get stronger, then that turns into excitement. I get excited. Yes, I walk out of the gym all pumped up. Yes, I've done the right thing. But if I interpret it as, oh my God, I'm going to hurt myself, this is not supposed to happen this way, and then you start telling yourself a little story as to why you should be freaking out, that gets turned into stress. Now take that into the work context, right? If you go in the morning, and this happens a lot, right? In trainings, people tell us that this happens a lot. You go in the morning and sit down and you're dutifully doing your work, and your boss comes in. And for some reason, she doesn't say anything. She just keeps walking straight to her desk. And then you can have two kinds of responses. One is, oh, she must be very busy today. She didn't realize that she just walked in and she didn't say hello. Or the other response, a very human response to, oh my God, what did I do? I don't know what I've done. She's not even talking to me. Now you're going to entertain one thought or the other. It's completely your choice. Which one comes most naturally for most people, for most human beings, is the, oh my God, what did I do? How can I freak out even more? What happens when we become a little bit older and wiser and in control of our mind? We go into the empathy mode and we go, I wonder what's really going on. I have no more information that she just walked past my desk. I'll go and find out. Or I'll give it a few minutes before I freak out. Either way, I'm going to leave the freaking out for later. So in other words, I'm going to leave the stress for later. And that's how you handle pressure. So there's a very clear difference between being under pressure and being stressed out or fearful that I may not be able to handle the situation because I don't know what it means, or I don't know how it's going to impact me, or there's a lot of uncertainty. And this is the reason why there's a lot of stress at the moment in the world, because there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what our future looks like. We don't know how we're going to deal with the things that we need to deal with. What is this new normal they talk about? And the media is definitely using this to sell news, and it's causing a lot of distress. But having said that, you are in charge of the level of stress you make. You need to catch yourself a little bit earlier. Yeah.
So Peter, if I could just jump in here, because oftentimes this can get misinterpreted when people think, oh, so you're saying it's all in my head and it's not really a difficult situation that I'm in, when you know, if we're saying that it's about stress is about the perception rather than the objective events. And yet there's this balance, because there are events in life that are challenging for most people. You know, there's definitely, I mean, life is going to throw us challenges. That's, if we don't put ourselves into challenge, like going to the gym, for example, life is going to bring challenges to us. So where's this balance between what's just our perception of an event versus, yes, there are difficult things that we have to face. I mean, that's a difficult
that's a very good, that's a very good point. It's important that we think about this in terms of knowing myself. It's not just a term, knowing myself. You know, there's a reason why older people that know themselves a bit better tend to be calmer, because they've learned things about themselves. I'll give you an example from myself. For years, I was getting very, very anxious, and I didn't know why, until I worked out that if I drink coffee for a prolonged period of time, I get very anxious. But it's not a psychological anxiety. I mean, I added psychological anxiety to it by freaking out even more. But in the beginning, it was simply a physical response of my body to too much caffeine over time, building up over time. So eventually now I know myself, and instead of freaking out when I start to feel anxiety, I say, well, hang on, this is a different kind of anxiety. What have I been doing? What have I been eating? What has been in my environment that could be causing this physical response that I'm interpreting as anxiety or stress? So that knowing yourself, it's a good idea. If you know that you're hypersensitive to other people's emotions, you're a very sensitive soul. I happen to be a sensitive soul, and then I have to watch that. Yeah, I've learned that. I have to watch that. I have to train my mind not to run away with a negative thought necessarily if I don't have all the information. And that's probably a good question to ask yourself. Do I have all the information around this situation? And the other one is, does the person, if the stress or the pressure is coming from another person, do they have all the information, or do they have a conflict of interest in trying to make me scared? Because that's how people manipulate other people, by causing fear on them. So you can have a set of questions to analyze things.
So this is a really important point, and we talk about this in some of the training courses that we run for workplaces, this idea of knowing yourself, because it's like there's going to be enough stresses and challenges out there in the external world. We don't need to add additional stresses by the way we then respond to it. So life is tough enough as it is. Let's not add extra stress in how we manage our own response. But that knowing yourself, so let's have a conversation about what are some of the signs of stress, because again, we've been talking about this, how important it is to spot it early when you're having an off day, rather than wait until you're at breaking point, or wait until you're snapping at someone or saying something that's going to backfire or causing more difficulties in life. How do we get better at checking in with ourselves? And in my experience, it's usually physical, but there are physical signs of stress, there are mental, there are emotional, you might just have behaviors you notice yourself doing. It might be about going to the fridge, finding something sweet to sort of soothe yourself a bit more without even thinking about it. But if we can get better at spotting our own personal patterns of stress, some people might find they're sleeping a lot more than normal, they shut down, whereas other people might sleep a lot less. They might find themselves awake or having interesting dreams, or these can be some of the very, very first sort of warning signs that, oh, I could be facing something difficult right now. There could be something going on that's just moved me along that continuum a little bit, because we all move up and down that continuum all the time, right?
Yeah. In my case, one thing that I realized years ago is that I was incredibly critical of other people. When I get stressed, I tend to become really grumpy and judgy. And that's a sign now to me. I listen to myself and I say, boy, am I sounding boring to myself. I'm boring myself. That's how critical I'm becoming. I'm boring myself. And that tells me, hang on, what's the pressure in my environment that I haven't paid attention to? And this is what a person with wisdom, this is something that we can do. We can learn what are our pressure points. What causes me pressure? What causes me pressure is something totally different to someone else. I for example, going to the physical, because that's something easy to relate to. My body doesn't like stretching. When I go and stretch, it feels that's painful. But I've talked to you before, Emmy, and you say that when you stretch, that feels so nice. It's like such a nice stretch. And there I am sweating, freaking out because I'm going to break apart, and you're just enjoying the stretch. So it's about me knowing, hang on, I experience what is a good thing in a painful way, but it doesn't mean that I have to stop. It just means that I have to persist until my body and my brain breaks the brain. Break is not a very good word here. Goes past the pain barrier to the pressure. And in an emotional level, sometimes we have to be okay with that too. I see a lot of people calling everything stress. If they're nervous for something, that's stress, and it should be stopped. If somebody says the wrong word, or they should stop, everything should stop so they don't feel bad. It doesn't work that way. We become less able to do stress the more we put ourselves in an environment that gradually, that it's a pressure environment. And then we learn to deal with the different levels of pressure. And we also learn to see the pressure, to identify our own personal signs and symptoms of pressure. And then we don't have to turn it into stress. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is important because sometimes people go the other way. They become so much aware of how they're feeling that they might, for example, wake up every morning and start to scan everything for, oh, how am I feeling today? Am I feeling stressed? Is there any stress in my life? Oh, there's stress. And then they find it and they create it. And we don't want to go that far either. Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to have a life like that. You're being hypersensitive. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was at the pool with Lucas, and the water was cold, and he knew that. And I showed him how to get into the water, which was just walk to the water and jump in. You don't think about it, you jump in. It's not going to hurt you, it's just cold. But he was coming to the water and thinking about it, stopping himself, thinking about it. So I taught him, look, you just keep walking, don't stop, don't think about it. And eventually he did that. He jumped into the water, and very wisely, for a 6-year-old, he says, I'm going to do that 5 times, Daddy. And he did that 5 times. He went into the water. He didn't need to do that, but he kind of intuitively knew that if he did it 5 times, he was practicing something good, and it was going to serve him. And he did that. He stepped out of the pool and jumped back in 5 times. So that's a good experience. You can overthink things in life, and that will turn pressure into a necessary stress. And what we want to avoid is that interpretation into negativity that causes stress.
So I'm just going to put a call out there now to see, obviously we were just saying we all have our different signs of stress, our own little things that we notice. If anyone wants to share things that you notice, because I'm sure there's other people who it's the same, whether it's getting grumpy or sleep or food or something else entirely. So feel free to chuck that in the comments there. And if you've got any questions at this point, jump in, where want to see them come through.
Right.
So then some of the other sort of signs I mentioned, physically, people can often talk about stomach upset being another one that people notice. Another one that's come up a lot is thoughts racing. People can find themselves not being able to focus on one thing, jumping from different tasks from one project to another without sort of finishing anything. So that's one of the more sort of mental signs and symptoms of stress that can come up. Obviously, emotionally, there's mood, being down or being afraid are the most common ones there. And behaviors, the other one that we don't talk about so much, but is very, very common is people turning to some kind of substance to try and sort of settle the nerves or to relax or whatever it might be. There's different purposes that can serve. So alcohol or drugs.
Or it could be something as simple as biting your nails. If you find yourself, you don't normally bite your nails and you start biting the nails, is there something there? Am I feeling some kind of pressure here? Am I doing some interpretation into stress?
Yeah.
Remember, the pressure that is interpreted as a good thing, if you interpret pressure as a good thing, you get excited. You get excited with life. You get happy with life. Yeah. That's why people walk out of the gym, you know, with a big chest and walking in love, because they know they've done something good for their bodies. Now, pressure that is interpreted as negative, right? Then that's not going to be very good. So just be careful also with your beliefs. I see too many people that work in mental health and psychology that think everything is going to cause trauma, everything is going to cause stress, everything should be avoided. Not true, not true. If you don't have pressure, you haven't got life. Life is about pressure. Life is about a degree of pain and pleasure. And it's a dance between pain and pleasure. And we need to be comfortable with that and not be afraid. Because at the moment that we're afraid of that aspect and we only see pleasure, guess what happens to the pain? Goes haywire. It takes control over us. So it doesn't work. Embrace the pain, embrace the pleasure.
And that sort of relates to the comment, thanks, Sheila, lack of joy. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's often from forgetting to, when we're looking at one side of the coin, if there's always a positive and always a negative, then at the end of the day, you could say that it's neutral. But oftentimes when we're under stress, we tend to only look at that negative side and we miss out on the joy that's to be had on the other side of the coin.
That's right, because stress at its core is fear. And you can't be joyful if you're afraid. It doesn't go together. They can't occupy the same space. So one of the things that we must do as individuals is a very wise thing to do is when we feel stress, call it out. Okay, I am stressed, and then take it to the next level and say, I am afraid. Yeah. You don't need to talk about it with anyone. You can just have that internal conversation. What specifically am I afraid of? Yeah. And just make sure that you specifically identify what you're afraid of. And once you have very specifically identified, you could probably find in 80% of the cases that what you're afraid of, you probably will laugh because you know better. They're usually the fears that you develop when you were 5, but you're not 5 anymore. So that's a step forward. And those other things that you do that you're afraid of because you are afraid of, say, oh, okay, so what can I do to handle those?
I definitely can give you an example of this. I remember in the early days of public speaking, that was obviously, it's a big fear for a lot of people, but in the days leading up to a presentation, I'd find that I was extra stressed, starting to snap at people, perhaps being on edge, impatient. Impatience is a big one. And again, first noticing that and then going, okay, isolating, what is it that I'm stressed about? What's the fear? What's going on? I've got that presentation coming up. It's running in the background of my mind somewhere, that this is coming up, and I've got a fear of that. So once it's isolated, then you can do something with it. Then you can say, all right, I'm going to put that in a box. It's not for 3 days time. So I'm going to just give myself permission not to focus on it until we get to 1 day beforehand, or until we get to 3 hours beforehand. Is there anything that I can do to prepare in the meantime so that I'm, addressing that fear? Because if there's something I can do to prevent it or minimize it, great. But apart from that, I'm going to put it in a box, and it's just one little thing. It's not my whole life is stressful. It's I've got this coming up, and I know I'm going to be fine once it's all said and done. So that absolutely been incredibly helpful. So this is kind of relates to the
of course, if stress gets too much, if there's an issue that you can't handle by yourself, that's okay. That means you're human. We are all like that. We're social animals. We all need help from time to time. Go and get it. Go and get the help. Don't dilly-dally. Don't delay it. Go and talk to somebody that is mature, that you respect, or talk to a professional, a counselor, or a coach, or a psychologist. Whatever you need to do, go and do it, and do it quickly. Because the sooner you handle this, the sooner you can live your life to the fullest. And that's what it is about, getting the joy back, like Sheila said.
Yes.
We want to get that joy back.
So
and I think this takes us naturally to burnout.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So burnout is the term that's used. And again, it's another one of those terms that's being used more and more regularly by people in the everyday world, sometimes that's not a helpful thing. But generally what we're talking about is when we have that physical and emotional exhaustion from being unable to cope with work generally, but it could be any kind of activity, either because we don't have the authority that we need to do our job properly, or it's too complex, or there's too many demands for the time that you've got available, or the resources. So it's this idea that it's stress over a prolonged period of time. Yeah. So to use that sort of muscle analogy, it's a bit of a cliched metaphor, but it's just a fantastic analogy, because you can stress a muscle once, one exercise, and you put it down, it's okay. But if you're holding on to a huge weight for a long period of time, that muscle's not going to be able to cope. It needs to do two things. One, you need to be able to put the weight down, have some time to recover. That's why when you do a sport or an activity, you need to have your recovery days so the muscle can rebuild. But so one part is kind of removing some of the stress, but the other part is building up your own muscle strength so that you can carry more over time. And that's this idea of emotional fitness, isn't it? So it's
absolutely
not simply doing more of it, but also changing your technique sometimes for how you carry those weights, how you address things, how you think about things, what your beliefs are, for example.
And one of the things that I've learned lately from a physical world, from the exercise world, is the importance of form. When you're doing an exercise, you need to have the proper form, because if you don't have the proper form, you can hurt yourself. Or even if you don't hurt yourself, you're not going to be building all the muscles in your body, because you're not going to be targeting those muscles. Now, how does this apply to the emotional and psychological self? Proper form is very important. Why are you doing what you're doing? Do you have clarity around that? I've never seen a person that has burned out that knew exactly why they were doing what they were doing. Yeah. They didn't have a strong why. The passion had left the building, like Elvis. It had left the building. So what is your why? See, as we develop, as we mature, as we grow, sometimes what used to be important is not important anymore. That's life. So you might be in a job that you loved 20 years ago, and it met everything that you needed, but it doesn't now. And you're still trying to succeed, to be this amazing superhuman around it. That's going to cause a lot of pressure. And you're not going to be able to handle that pressure if you don't have a strong why, if it doesn't fit anymore. Yeah.
And
so
I think
what's
that's
your
very
form?
relevant.
You need to have a structure.
That's really, really relevant right now, Peter, because with the COVID situation this year, it's forced a lot of people, or allowed a lot of people, to sort of stop and reflect on the nature of their work. And they may have more or less input in being able to redesign the way that they do work. So I know with some of the organizations we work with, they have staff who are desperate to get back into the office, and for various reasons, whereas others who are liking the work from home scenario, and most have a combination of employees that are, some love working from home and some want to be back in the way it was before. And then others, may have realized that they don't like their work at all, or perhaps they prefer to work part-time, or it's sort of opened up other possibilities for people, which is great. But it can also be confronting as well, because it forces us to make some decisions about what we want to do with our time moving forward, which is what work-life balance is all. Or maybe we should talk about that now. Work-life balance is a term that it's not necessarily my favorite, because I don't think it captures exactly what it was intended to in the beginning. So it's a great concept that we need to think about our whole of life, and that's important. But for me, work is a part of life. It's not work or life. It's not like you're alive at work, at home, and then you go to work and you die a little bit inside. Ideally, you enjoy what you're doing, and you can be present there at work as a part of life. So I kind of tend to talk more about work-life integration, work-life interaction, work-life harmony, and we can all sort of structure that in a way that works for us, but it means making some decisions.
Absolutely, yeah. You shouldn't feel alive at work, and at home, and then when you have to go to work, you feel horrible every single time. That's no way to live life. You got to find a reason why you do what you do that actually moves you. Even if you don't like your job, you may like what you get out of the job. So find that out. And you know, sometimes these issues, if you're a professional, if you have a job, if you have a career, I highly recommend that if you have never done it, get a coach, get somebody to act as a mirror for you and ask the tough questions. You know, why do you do what you do? You know, how do you end up with that job? Oh, it was given to me. I put in an application and they gave it to me, and I was really happy. This is how most people fall into a job. You know, they go for an application and they put in an application because they like the pay, and then they get the job and they're happy for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, they start complaining about everything. Why? Because there hasn't been a lot of thought going into who am I, what are my skills, what makes me thrive as a person, as an individual, and what job should I have? Like any jobs that involves an office is a big no-no for me. I'm not an office person. If I want to die quickly, give me an office job. So I need to be aware of that. I need when I do work, if I want to get the best results out of me, it can't be in an office environment. It has to be in a creative space. It has to be an open space. It has to be a place where I can thrive. And we're all different. Emmy is the opposite. You love
Absolutely.
an office, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, she thrives in
all my
office.
things where I need them to be organized. But this is, again, this whole situation, I think one of the unintended benefits has been that workplaces are more and more appreciating the diversity of their workforce, that some people will be like Peter and some people will be more like myself, and everything else in between. So a good work-life balance doesn't mean you must shut your computer or your work off at a certain time of day. Some people, like myself, that works fairly well. These are my working hours and I'm fully focused and present there. And then outside of that, I can be fully focused and present doing other things in my life. But for some people, it's a lot more fluid than that. And, you know, that being forced to, for example, some of the policies we've seen where you can't send an email, for example, after hours, can actually be more stress provoking for someone if they, oh, I've forgotten to send that email, I just want to send that off and then I'll be able to relax for the evening, for example. They can't do that. That can actually be more stressful. So I think, you know, this idea that everyone's different and our policies and in workplaces need to be able to work for all different styles of work, all different preferences of work behavior. And just considering that, I think, is a massive step forward for a lot of organizations, because we've had a very narrow way of thinking about work-life balance and what is good mental health. Now we're expanding that and broadening that, which is a good thing in my view.
Yeah, very good. Okay, we could talk more and more and more, but I think we better talk about compassion fatigue. We fit it in.
Great. All right. Well, last little topic.
Well, let me start with saying that I understand what people mean by compassion fatigue, but from a philosophical perspective, I don't agree. It's not possible to experience compassion fatigue. Compassion is love. Compassion is giving in an altruistic manner, and that's inexhaustible. It cannot be fatigued. Like the sun, it doesn't run out of energy. It keeps producing energy. So compassion fatigue, it's the wrong term. But what are people referring to when they talk about compassion fatigue? They're usually really loving people, really giving people. They're empaths. Normally, they're empaths. But they get to a point where they have a need to be recognized for their work, to be given thank you, to feel important in a social setting, and that's not happening. They're not getting the extrinsic, external reward, you know, of the work that they're doing, and they're not getting also the intrinsic one. They're not getting their own pat in the back saying, look, even if nobody sees it, you know you're doing a good job, so keep it up, and give it the whole pat in the back themselves. That's not happening. So they're feeling
And so
fatigued.
what then And then what then happens from a psychological perspective is subconsciously even the mind says, well, I need to stop caring to protect myself from giving and not getting any compassion satisfaction back, which is another term that's been recognized as well. So I'm going to stop caring. It's typically used in health services and health professions, where that is the job of people to care for others, both physically but also, emotionally, because we're human, and as you said, empaths. That they've cared for so long that I just can't care anymore, and they become sort of desensitized to it. And that's the problem, is that we as humans, we kind of know that doesn't feel right. It's not why we were helping in the first place. And in that space, people can sometimes then treat others poorly from that space as well. So we want to make sure that we can continue having compassion in a way that generates compassion satisfaction rather than compassion fatigue.
Again, that's a tough one. If you already gone into the space where people are annoying you, you know what I'm talking about. I think we've all been there. The people,
even if you're not in the health profession, it can be
even if you're not in the
friends.
health profession, you can be. It could be Christmas time, and you're with the whole family, and you love them to bits, but you can't stand them. That can happen. Or it can be your kids. You love them to bits, but today you can't stand it. So if you're in that space, take some time out. Go and breathe somewhere. A very useful thing that I highly recommend to people: spend a couple of minutes deciding what you're really enjoying in life. So it's a gratitude list. That's what we call it. What has happened today? Even though I don't feel like doing it, I don't feel like concentrating in it. What has happened today and yesterday that was really cool, like was really nice, and I tend to take it for granted. What are some of the things that I take for granted that are really nice? Oh, well, what could be a really simple thing? I know, water, clean water out of a tap. Oh my God, isn't that amazing? As much water as I want out of a tap, fresh, clean, whenever I want. 300 years, we didn't have that. Even less time than that. We didn't have that. Now we have it. A shower. You know what a luxury a shower is for most human beings in this planet? Have you taken it for granted? So when you sit down and you do things like that, simple, stupid, silly things that you take for granted that are nothing, make them something. And you will feel the energy come back to you. And then once your energy, your neurology has shifted, and then you're in a neutral space. You don't have to be positive. This is not about positive thinking, but it is about being in a neutral space. When you have taught yourself not to be negative, don't be positive if you don't want to. I recommend it, but don't be positive, but don't be negative. Stop the negativity. Go to a neutral space. Once you're in a neutral space, maybe then you can do a list about what you really like about your kids that are annoying you so much today. What is it that you really like about them? Because you love them to bits and you know that. And then you will start shifting your neurology, and that fatigue will start be removed. It actually works very, very quickly.
And
we've seen
Peter,
it happen with hundreds of people.
Yeah. We talk in more depth in the Resilience at Work course about some
Absolutely.
very useful models for how you can care for others and have compassion for others, but in a new way of doing it, which I wish we had time for today, but I'm going to have to leave that one for another day.
Yes.
We've talked about stress, burnout, work-life balance, compassion fatigue. I'm going to open up to any sort of final questions to send them through now. So I hope that you've taken just a little piece of something away from today that's useful. There's so much in these topics. We could talk for days on each one, but we wanted to give you just a little bit of some food for thought to go away, perhaps something that you can use in real life. So let us know your question or what it is that you're taking away from today that you can use. After this,
while we wait, we tell them what we're going to be talking about in the next Facebook Live, because it's pretty cool too.
Yeah, so next one is going to be a lot about trauma, PTSD, grief and loss. Again, very relevant to a lot of people at the moment, and that's why we've gone with the the topics that got the most interest from our call out earlier. So how do we prevent and manage psychological safety in the workplace where we know employees might have had past trauma in their lives? How do we manage potential triggers in the workplace? How can we support anyone experiencing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? There were some questions around the impact of lockdown for well-being. So that's, of course, lots to talk about with that one. And the impact of having extended periods of working from home and disconnection from other people. So, for example, we've received stories of people that have staff with partners or children who've lost their jobs, perhaps lost family members. There's been a lot of loss in different forms over the past 9 months, should I say. So grief and loss, trauma, PTSD, everything of that nature next time. So you can send your questions into us at admin@thewmhi.com, or you can post them here. We'll collect them all and do our best to answer all those questions that come in.
So some of the cool questions is, how do we prevent and manage? How do we manage potential triggers in the workplace? How can we support people experiencing PTSD? What is the impact of the lockdowns on well-being? That's a good one. Impact of extended periods of working from home and disconnection. Very good stuff. Good stuff.
Brilliant.
All right.
All right. Thanks for joining us. And make sure you go to the Workplace Mental Health Institute Facebook page so you can like and follow us. You should get a notification when the next session is being run, which will be same time next week. So stay tuned. Lots more interesting topics after that as well. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Leave any questions in the comments that you want us to talk about next time, and then we can address them. All right. In the meantime, have a wonderful week and make sure to relax and enjoy life. Have a mentally healthy day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.